The year is 2015, and over the course of the next 2 years, a golden era will end while a brand new one will begin to take its place in the world of Pokemon speedrunning. But because both of these eras took place in the region of Kanto, one affected the other in a way that caused speedrunners to ignore this game for years. First game you probably know as Pokemon Red, which is a game with a lively, thriving speedrunning community who pushed these games so far that when its world record is beaten by even a single second, it is a very big deal. But the Gen 3 Kanto remakes, Fire Red Leaf Green, were labeled as boring, inferior, and too frustrating to speedrun compared to the originals. And because of the legacy of Gen 1 games combined with such strenuous conditions that weren't present in other Pokemon speedruns, Fire Red Leaf Green was ultimately ignored by speedrunners as a whole for years. That is, until someone outside of the community started speedrunning the game and became so obsessed with the speedrun that they started dreaming of solutions that would eventually revolutionize what it meant to speedrun Pokemon Fire Red Leaf Green forever. And that person was me.
Oh my god! Oh god! I hate this game so much, dude. World record by 2 seconds.
If you don't know me, by the way, I'm PulseEffects, and I'm someone who chose to spend 10 years of his life speedrunning the Pokemon series. Because as RNG heavy as the series is, I find it kind of thrilling that the fate of your speedrun is not entirely in your hands, where knowledge and strategy becomes a masterclass solution in how you adapt to good and bad situations throughout your speedrun. But out of all the Pokemon games that I ended up speedrunning, the one that emphasized that mentality for me the most was Fire Red Leaf Green. To understand what I mean by this and how I eventually got to that ridiculous dream, I first need to give a quick summary of how the run plays out and what led me to having that dream. Before we dive into this explanation, do you enjoy being able to actually buy and own Pokemon cards? Because today's sponsor, Arena Club, has got you covered. If you've never heard of Arena Club, they specialize in all sorts of cards like sports, the magical TCG, and Pokemon cards. What makes them different from other card shops is how much more you can get out of their service. So the way it works is they put together their own packs, show you what you can get from their sites. Anything you get digitally, you can receive physically exactly the way that they show, pre-graded and everything. And the moment you open up a pack, you can actually see exactly what went into creating this card and sell it straight back to them at fair market value, which is exactly what I'm going to do right now. All right, there's a lot of tiers here to choose from, but I'm going to be opening up from the Ruby pack, which has a little bit more to offer, at least compared to like Gold and below. All right, and now we're going to open up our first slab pack. Ooh, that music hits way different. What is that? Magneton? Okay, wait, what PSA? What PSA? PSA 10 Magneton. Ooh, okay. Pretty cool. Not bad, not bad. So now I know what card I have. I can immediately either sell it back to the site, have this already pre-graded card shipped to me, or possibly wait and negotiate offers from people looking to buy this specific card. If this sounds awesome to you, be sure to check out Arena's Club today for 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase when you go to my URL or use the code on screen. It all starts with the struggles that the Squirtle evolutionary line needs to go through for every battle in Fire Red Leaf Green. Because despite the fact that Squirtle is the fastest Pokemon for a Fire Red Leaf Green speedrun, it struggles so much early on that it needs to be carried by its ability Torrent, which grants more power to your water moves, but at the cost of having to constantly be at low HP to keep it activated, which usually means a lot of speedruns die from the risk of being at low HP. But add on to the dangers the early sections present, we're also required to use very powerful but inaccurate moves just to get to a part of the game that gives you some breathing room, which is when you finally evolve Squirtle into Blastoise. And with the breathing room you get from Blastoise, you'll have just enough time to prepare yourself mentally for when the game hits you with some of the most heart-pounding final battles ever created in a Pokemon speedrun inside of the Pokemon League, where adapting takes on a life of its own based on how much you're able to set up without dying, how much risk you're willing to take, or if you decide to use strategies that don't always have a guaranteed success rate. So with all this in mind, making it into the Hall of Fame on personal best or world record pace created this feeling that was so powerfully rewarding that everything that the game threw at you early on was worth the pain just to reach that point. For all you anime lovers out there, it's a lot like when you catch up on One Piece. And because of how powerful that was to me, I became obsessed with chasing that feeling. If this sounds unhealthy, it absolutely is, because it's basically gambling in a nutshell. And that obsession got to the point where I'd wake up, live stream my speedruns, go to bed, dream of doing those speedruns, then start the cycle over and over again for nearly an entire year straight. However, the rest of the community didn't really resonate with the game as much as I did. And the reason why, I think, stems from how popular Gen 1 Kanto speedruns were before I got into speedrunning Fire Leaf Green. This was a time where Generation 1 speedruns had such a massive popularity boom that the viewership of people going for these world records reached the thousands. But more importantly, speedrunners of Gen 1 concluded that using only Squirtle was the fastest way to reach the credits for years, until they eventually discovered that the combination of Squirtle and Nidoking was even faster. And thanks to speedrunning titans like Worcester, Exarian, and Gunner Maniac competing at the exact same time, all eyes were on the beloved Gen 1 Kanto speedrun, creating what I like to call the Gen 1 golden era that lasted from 2010 all the way to around 2017. So in the year of 2015, when the golden era was starting to wind down, it was easy to ignore Fire Red as a speedrun because of its similarities to Gen 1 Kanto speedruns. After all, they both fought the same gyms, a lot of the same trainers, and even picked the same exact starter Pokemon because it was faster in both games. So with a massive Gen 1 bias from the community, Fire Red Leaf Green seemed pretty boring in comparison. But being new to the community, I was almost entirely immune to the influence of Generation 1. The reason why is kinda silly, but I honestly hated the way Gen 1 looked from a graphical standpoint, but I still really wanted to enjoy Kanto games in some way, shape, or form without playing Red. So I decided to try Fire Red, fell in love with it, and got better and better as a competitor all the way to the year 2016. But the influence of Pokemon Red was still ever present within the community, and sometimes it was all people could talk about, which kind of frustrated me because I really wanted more people to see what I saw in Fire Red Leaf Green speedruns. So my solution was to try and get as many people as I could to speedrun the game for themselves by trying to make parts of the game less frustrating to speedrun. Particularly, the frustrating parts of Fire Red Leaf Green speedruns are in the early sections that I like to divide like this: the Brock section, the Nugget Bridge to SS Sand section, and the Vermilion Gym to Rock Tunnel section. Starting with the Brock section, it might seem like it'd be a breeze given Squirtle's overwhelming type advantage, but the pitiful moves that they gave Squirtle in Generation 3 tells a different story. Because the earliest water move Squirtle learns is Bubble, which has an awful 20 base power to it in Gen 3, making it so you're unable to KO both of Brock's Pokemon even with a times 4 effective move, unless you use Squirtle's ability to power up water moves at low HP. However, that ability didn't just save time on Brock, saving a total of 7 turns or about a minute or two of time save throughout his entire gym. So because of how valuable saving that amount of time is, we had to find a setup for Squirtle to be at low HP just long enough for a 56% chance to KO Brock's main Pokemon Onix in one single hit. And sadly, not even a level up or years of therapy can fix the Brock section. But let's say you got past him just fine, surviving and managing your HP perfectly past Route 3, Mount Moon, and Misty before stepping towards Nugget Bridge. Well, after Misty is where the game starts to introduce the most annoying, painful threats in the game, grass Pokemon like Oddish, Bulbasaur, and Ivysaur. Unfortunately, these little nightmare cabbages are very bulky and contain moves that waste the most amount of time and resources possible. And since Squirtle and Wartortle don't learn any good special attacking moves to cover grass Pokemon with, you can't even one-shot them to avoid those annoying circumstances. And so, the only thing we could turn to in order to handle these grass demons from Nugget Bridge all the way through Rock Tunnel is the move Mega Kick. While this move does have a 120 base power, it also has 5 PP and a 75% accuracy that we had to rely on for half the duration of the speedrun, making the first hour of gameplay very frustrating and creating an unhealthy cycle of resetting for speedrunners who were using the most optimal strategies. And so, after experiencing that pain long enough, I wanted to try and get rid of as many Mega Kicks as possible to make playing the game easier, which led me to adding its distant cousin Mega Punch to Squirtle's move pool. Not only is its base power really awful, but its accuracy is only 10% more than Mega Kick, and I was rightfully criticized by some of the top runners for trying to make it work. Because even though it can hit grass Pokemon decently hard and more accurately, you would have to use both Kick and Punch at the same time to make it worth it, because it was nowhere near powerful enough to do the job without kick, making things unintentionally messier. But in the time that I spent trying to get this strategy off the ground, I ended up missing what people really wanted from Fire Red Leaf Green speedruns, because they didn't want to make the game easier. They wanted something unique, hopefully faster and more refreshing than just using Squirtle like Pokemon Red runs did. So instead of making the turtle better, the community turned to a different starter Pokemon that felt like it had real potential, creating the Charmander era of Fire Red Leaf Green speedruns. Charmander's introduction to the speedrun was a strange but much needed change to the game, because other than myself, there were maybe 2 other people speedrunning the game at the time, and so when the Fire Red Leaf Green world record holder himself, Exarion, saw another speedrunner messing around with Charmander, a lot of people started to take interest in Charmander when he reinvented his fun-looking speedrun route. What started off as just for fun turned into a real tangible path towards breaking the world record held by Squirtle for so long. But to properly do this with Charmander, it would need an entirely different approach from Squirtle, where the answer changed from a balance of defense, struggles, and kicks to one with a more glass cannon approach where you risk everything just to KO things faster. And thanks to having a high physical attack stat and the ability to KO grass Pokemon with fire moves like Mega Kick felt like they had somewhat of a healthier relationship on Pokemon like Charmander, who only needed to use it on water Pokemon. And when it came to the ever-present rock Pokemon, Charmander's physical attack stat came even more clutch with moves such as Metal Claw and Brick Break, but also surprisingly fire moves that ate through the low special defense of those rock Pokemon despite having a resistance, which by the end of the entire speedrun would overtake Charmander's move pool entirely. And let me just say that if Squirtle's wrap-up to the game was considered high octane, Charmander's was on another level, because Charmander thrived in low HP to overpower everything at the speed of light. However, this approach to Charmander runs ended up making the speedrun even more risky and luck-based than Squirtle in a lot of cases, but added an even bigger thrill factor that speedrunners wanted to put to the test, shooting the speedrun's popularity up to insane heights to see just how far they could push the orange lizard. And so, over the course of a few months, Charmander fever grew and grew until eventually, this happened.
Surf is risky but fast. Surf, okay. Crit. Crit. Got hit. 94% range. One more Fire Blast. One more Fire Blast. Perfect. Always all the time. I might need a good champion. Alright, I get those pretty free as long as I don't get extremely bad luck. Shadow Punch. Alright, have to hit 75%. 3 down. But time loss here, so really hoping for a good land. Oh, I'm gonna have to double super. This is so awkward. That was so awkward. That miss was so bad, the Hyper Beam miss. That would have been perfect if he didn't miss. It's gonna be so fucking close now. I need to hit a +4 range with Fire Blast on Dragonite though, so this is still really risky. Alright, here we go. 82%. I don't think I can afford to do super safe champ. Okay, 39 to 47, 26 to 31. 39 to 47, 26 to 31. 1, 3. Hit the range. 65%. 65% again. Might be it. That might be it. Might be it. It's gonna be close though. Have to hit a fire blast. I'll lose if I don't hit it. I think that's it. I think that's it. Okay, we have dethroned the turtle and replaced him with ferocious lizard with amazing special attack. So yeah, awesome. Good first step to getting this game where it needs to be. Thank you, Sheep, for the 1,000.
This was an absolutely monumental moment for Pokemon Fire Red, and one that I've rarely seen replicated in other Pokemon speed games nearly 10 years later. But as amazing as this moment for Charmander was, something about it never sat right with me. For one, I knew that Squirtle could absolutely take this world record back pretty easily if someone tried to push hard enough, because the former world record with Squirtle had even more glaring time save from having hit an optional trainer, losing nearly an entire minute. I was also fairly convinced that there was something we were definitely overlooking. I just couldn't put my finger on it until I decided to overcome a huge personal barrier: social anxiety. So when I eventually got the courage to ask world record holder himself, Exarian, what he thought the Squirtle route would need in order to compete against Charmander, it was a big moment, not only for my own personal growth as a person, but also for the history of the game. Because as if the universe was rewarding me for my efforts, I got the exact answer I needed, as Exarian pointed me to a place I had never looked. The part of the game that no longer needed Mega Kick. That whole time, I was so absorbed in trying to solve that part of Fire Red Leaf Green that I had overlooked the problems we experienced in the actual hardest part of the game, the Elite Four. In particular, Lorelei stuck out like a sore thumb for Squirtle, because her team consists of mostly bulky water Pokemon that just don't die to any of Squirtle's moves unless you use a ton of X items to boost its power. And because of Squirtle's lack of coverage for her water Pokemon, our Lorelei strategy revolved around teaching Strength and Brick Break to Squirtle, then maximizing our attack with 6 entire X attacks, then pray we one-shot all of our Pokemon. But there were two problems with this strategy. The first was that we weren't always guaranteed to KO all of our Pokemon, even with the maximum amount of boost we could get, thanks to the high defense stats of Cloyster and Slowbro. The other was the random chance to get Hail from her lead Pokemon Dugong, which unfortunately was not only the best Pokemon to set up on, but getting Hail in Generation 3 speedruns is easily the most time-consuming thing that you could get. Because every turn that passes during Hail is another turn where text scrolls by telling you that Hail damaged your Pokemon. And if you were unlucky enough, you could lose an entire minute of time save to Hail alone because of how long it takes to set up on her. So when Exarian compared the blazing speeds of Charizard's clear time on Lorelei, it was clear that something needed to change. In the moment of hearing this, I obsessed over Exarian's statement to the point where I lost a ton of sleep trying to figure out what we could do to change that. So I ended up spending that entire night looking at every single one of Squirtle, Wartortle, and Blastoise's Gen 3 moves to try and see if there were any better physical moves, which got me desperate enough to consider keeping Mega Kick all the way until Lorelei. But that solution is very silly, and I knew that I was on the wrong track after staying up way past the point that I should have. So when I went to bed that night with a mind full of weird ideas, I found the first answer I needed through a dream. And in this dream, I was still researching frantically, but with a clone of myself looking over my shoulder. Eventually, that clone would say, if you can't take her on physically, why not specially? And that was the exact revelation I needed to bring Squirtle back from the grave to save Fire Red Leaf Green from a potentially terrible fate that Charmander could have given to the speedrun. I'll get to that second part in a moment, but the morning after I heard those words, I decided to look through every one of Squirtle, Wartortle, and Blastoise's special attacks, and unfortunately, I could only find 2 moves that looked viable against Lorelei. The first being Hidden Power. So this would absolutely be the best answer possible if you were able to obtain it in a reasonable way. But in Fire Red Leaf Green, to even obtain Hidden Power, you need to catch a Meowth and land a 5% chance from its ability Pickup while on a speedrun that just so happened to have a Squirtle with a really good randomly generated Hidden Power. Well, that was unfortunately way too unreasonable. The second move was completely reasonable. In fact, This move had actually been in our move pool since the very first moment I started speedrunning the game. And after some thorough testing and timing, I concluded that using the special attacking move Bite was without a doubt the fastest way for Squirtle to beat Lorelei, but only by about 10 seconds on average, with a potentially huge risk. With this new Bite fight, it was actually the same exact amount of turn, but instead of 6 X attacks on Dugong, we would use 4 X specials to sweep through most things that weren't Dugong or Lapras with Bite until it died. But Lapras having a Citrus Berry equipped made this a bit of a problem by letting it have 3 chances to paralyze you with Body Slam. Where a lot of credibility around Bite strats came into play was that, in theory, by giving Dugong less turns to use Hail thanks to less turns of setup, we would have more opportunity to either avoid her using Hail or possibly flinch her with Bite, saving around an entire minute of time save. This, however, had a very low chance of happening for what could be a very high risk of losing a lot of time at the end of the game, but it was a good step in the right direction that I knew Squirtle needed. Well, not just Squirtle, but Fire Red as a whole. Because despite how exciting and refreshing Charmander was to speedrun after the Gen 1 Golden Era, from 2016 all the way to 2017, almost nobody was finishing runs with Charmander. All because the high-risk, high-reward dangers that the Charmander route presented as answers outweighed the satisfaction, but unlike Squirtle, it didn't have the defensive capabilities to provide some relief when things went wrong, meaning if you missed any of those important Mega Kicks, you would probably just straight up die. And it wasn't just Mega Kick that put you in this situation either. It was literally all the same exact sections that Squirtle struggled on, but with a different coat of paint. While the grass type seemed greener on the Charmander side, the water type was made murkier. Where the electric type seemed more manageable, the rock type would throw boulders larger than life. And where the sun illuminated Charmander's path into the Elite Four, it could instead blind it with missed opportunities and chances at glory with no guarantee for success, which for the health of the Fire Red Leaf Green speedrunning scene made Squirtle the best option for a speedrun main if the game were to maintain a healthier balance, which is exactly what I saw when Charmander started to pick up relevance and speedrunners started to lose steam trying to compete by using it. And so in the coming days after my X Special Bite discovery, I would be given the opportunity to participate in a yearly speedrun marathon in a Squirtle versus Charmander showcase against someone whose personal best time was close to mine. So I knew that despite almost everyone in the community rooting for Charmander, I had to give one of the best showcases that I could with Bite strats. And the beautiful part is I ended up winning the entire thing. Now, this wasn't exactly my most graceful victory either, but what the showcase did do is it got the attention of the world record holder himself, Exarian, because as soon as I finished the race, he messaged me asking about my findings and he agreed that they were faster. However, he didn't seem that impressed by only a few seconds of time saved, and so I knew I needed more. And it would be here where I began to study the game once again to find more that I could work with. Literally anything. But I couldn't find anything no matter how hard I tried. So I ended up going to bed super late and ended up having yet another revolutionary dream. During this dream, I had thought about the race with Charizard producing that blazing sun blinding speedrunners from seeing Squirtle. And in the moments of me blocking the sun from overtaking my vision, Squirtle walked past that sun and pulled out the answer I was looking for: sunglasses. Instantly struck with inspiration, I looked up the in-game item, Black Glasses, an item that boosts the power of dark moves when held by a Pokemon. And to my surprise, it was in a spot that was directly in the path that you take inside of the game corner on your way to Giovanni. And given I had invented the fight myself, I knew that this would revolutionize Lorelei, saving yet another turn on her fight. What I didn't know is that this would change every single Fire Red Leaf Green speedrun category from this day forward. Because the moment I brought my findings to the community, they knew the battle of starter Pokemon was over. Because as it turns out, Bite was useful on Koga, your rival, Lorelei, Bruno, Lance, and the champion himself. And by the time the route had been fully figured out, the total amount of time Black Glasses saved was somewhere between 1 to 2 minutes of time saved, cementing Squirtle as the definitive best Pokemon to use in a Fire Red Leaf Green speedrun. But that is not where our entire story ends. Unfortunately for Charmander, Exarian's 205 was the only time Charmander ever held the world record. Many people did get close, including Exarian himself, nearly shaving off 2 to 3 entire minutes from the world record before my findings could be published. And if that run had finished, I have doubts that Fire Red would be the same game that it is today. Because success can sometimes be more blinding than failure, which is something I learned from working on and improving Squirtle for so long. And through my failure, I found a heavy consistency that the speedrunning community could never find from Charmander. But I never forgot about Charmander, even when I finally got a chance to hold the world record for myself by using Squirtle twice.
Yes! World record! By 2 seconds! Woo! Let's fucking go, baby! 202.
I fucking did it! That's right! I skipped 113 and I'm a legend!
So as an homage to my favorite era of Fire Red Leaf Green speedruns, I knew what I needed to do when the biggest speedrunning marathon, Games Done Quick, accepted me as the person to showcase Fire Red Leaf Green, where instead of it just being me, I told them that I wanted it to be a race. A race where I would use Charmander, and my friend and fellow longtime Squirtle enthusiast, JP Zinum, would face off once again with a Squirtle versus Charmander race. And to this day, I think it's actually the best showcase you'll find to know just how beautiful a Pokemon Fire Red Leaf Green speedrun actually is. Because not only did it get more eyes on Fire Red Leaf Green as a whole, but it got more people to want to try the game that was considered a worse version than the original Pokemon Red. But now, it had its place. And even when folks like me and Exarian eventually left the game behind, it was clear that the game didn't need us anymore for it to have its own identity, because it now had a thriving community and a consistent starter to balance risk and reward. And anyone who still wanted to try Charmander, they would still be there too. If you wanted a taste of my favorite Pokemon speedrun, Fire Red Leaf Green.